We did a lot of physical work on the farm. I love to physically be active and probably abused my body throughout the years, but and just to walk barefoot in the pig barns and let that pig shit just come up between your toes. And I loved that. I loved getting dirty, but then I loved getting dressed up and being very much a girl, too. And that was kind of like my grandma, she cleaned up really well. I knew early on that I wanted to be a nurse, but there was a lot of caregiving growing up, and it just came real natural, and sometimes to a fault. And after I got married, I got pregnant right away. About 9 months later, had Emily, and decided, because that's what my mom did, I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. There was no question about it. I was going to be a stay-at-home mom, and that's probably I probably look at that as one of my biggest accomplishments, to be a stay-at-home mom. There were some messages from growing up that now when I look back, it was a lot of hard work. It was, and you did all this for everyone. You did things for everyone. You went out of your way. You did not take care of yourself. And the main thing was, you will be rewarded in the end. If I was sitting in church, and we went to church every single day as a little girl, if I was sitting in church, then, you saved room for your guardian angel, and God was watching you all the time. I mean, that led to not sleeping at night and wondering if I did something wrong, and I'm going to wake up in a pit of fire, which is hell. I mean, there were some really strong messages I took. I decided a long time ago that I'm not going to volunteer at church in my spare time. I'm not going to do that. My parents need me. They both had their illnesses, dad before mom, and then mom. And so I went home very, very regularly and was their nurse. Dad died in his home, and he'd say to other siblings, "She's so good to me," like he was talking about me. But I would never get that verbal confirmation, except one day. I was staying overnight. It was my, turn during hospice. He was in hospice at home for 6 months. And I had to go to work in the morning, and I'd been there for several days. And there's one thing that each one of them said that I will never forget. And I was leaving for work. Dad was in his hospice bed, and I was leaving for work, 6 a.m. And he said to me, "I'm going to miss you." And that was the most he had said verbally probably ever in my life, to show me that, he appreciated me.
I didn't really get into the arts till I was probably in elementary school, and I started acting at a local children's theater, at Stepping Stone Theater in St. Paul. As far as like theater goes, I'd go to the Guthrie on school field trips, and I never saw a Native person on stage. I never saw any examples of Native people doing this work. I love to write, and I love speaking through my own voice just as much as I love speaking through a character's voice. And it's been really rewarding for me, and I've been lucky enough to be really nurtured by a lot of my theater community in what I've been doing. I often talk about my paternal grandmother when I talk about my theater work, especially the work that I do here in Minneapolis. In that, so my father was born in 1946 to a single mom, and she had run away from boarding school. She went to school in Wahpeton, North Dakota, and she ran away and came to Minneapolis, where she gave birth to my dad. But because she was unwed and a runaway, he was confiscated from her at birth, and he grew up in foster care. And by the time he aged out when he was 18, she had already passed away.
Mhm.
So they never really got to meet, except, I guess, in the very beginning. But I think about my grandmother a lot, in that here I am in the city that she lived in, that she came to, and spent the last years of a very short life in. You know, she wasn't much older than me when she passed away. Um, and I think of her so much in this work that I do, just because I think of the difference a generation makes, and that the life that she lived here is so incredibly different than the life that I do, and that she was practically invisible in this city, and this city didn't do anything to protect her or take care of her, and actually quite the opposite. It did a lot of harm to her, and she died quite anonymously here, without having any agency over her own story or her own voice. I'm really driven by reciprocity, this like concept of like a really non-capitalistic way of giving and taking, and that I think is really inherent in the way that I was taught as a Native kid, is this idea that like we always should offer something. And I think in a lot of ways storytelling and writing and acting have been my way to offer to my community specifically, like, you know, going all the way back to like my grandma, to the idea that if I can get on a stage and I can tell a story, or I can write a story down, like that's my way that I'm giving her voice.
I was actually born in Thailand in the refugee camps. We were sponsored by my grandparents, who was already in Menominee, and we landed in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, at their little small regional airport. And then my parents have just stayed in Menominee all their life. I got married to my husband, and then I moved to Minnesota from Wisconsin. And I've been in the Southwest region now for about almost 10 years. We're seeing that like a lot of the younger generation were having, a lot of miscommunication with their parents, because they're fighting this world of, where their friends want to be cool and they want to be cool, but then they come home and then a lot of what they hear at home is, oh, we want you to be traditional, we want you to be a good girl, that kind of thing. So it was kind of like a fight of two worlds. And so how do we bridge that gap so that we continue to have better relationships within our families? How do we get our parents engaged with, their kids' education? How do we continue to keep what are being passed down culturally, and then also navigate that through the new things that our younger generation is, coming forth with. Initially when we had these conversations, we talked about like, how do we truly empower our community to be better for the overall community? How do we, as our Hmong community, do better so that we can continue to contribute to the community that we are in? I have a passion for helping others, and helping others as in like making sure that they have their basic necessities in terms of, I think it comes from the fact that I have I'm a refugee. My parents are refugees, and we always had to now try to navigate whatever is in front of us. Like from a really young age, I always had to go with my mom to go translate at like the age of like 7, and so this like passion and want to like help people be able to help themselves, not do things for people, but then also get the building blocks and resources so that they can continue to help other people. And again, the only thing that I ask for them is that for them to pass their knowledge and their, what they know to other people as well. So from the community perspective, I think success to me would be like if I'm able to help build both structurally and also system-wise something in the Southwest here that would support and empower the Hmong community down here for years to come, for my grandchildren to be able to use and continue to carry on, that would be something that I would call success. People might not want to know about Coolor that's in Southwest Minnesota, but hey, they might know about her now.
In the world that we're in right now, the way that you get noticed is by being very radical, by taking extreme kinds of positions. My position is about love and compassion and fidelity to other humans. And that's just, not all that sexy. Although, I have a radio show. I write every month for Lavender Magazine. In a column that's written from my heart, a radio show that a lot of it is from my heart, and then I have a newsletter that I curate every month that goes out to 9,000 people. The newsletter is about how we are good to each other. I share stories about how humans show up for other humans and do these incredibly remarkable things, like a group of 4 Black men in their late teens or early 20s sitting at a restaurant, inviting the 70-something a white collar woman who's eating by herself to commemorate the anniversary that she had with her husband, who is now deceased, and the men inviting her over they're total strangers, but inviting her over to have dinner with them. It happens a gazillion times a day, but no one ever talks about that because that's not what is sexy.
My sister was murdered about over 30 some years ago. She was murdered, and she did everything. It happened on December 31st. She was coming down to the sobriety, I think it was the first sobriety power at American Indian Center. And she wanted to go home and change. And I said, no, don't. Just come with us. And she went with my older sister and her baby and her. And she went home and she walked in. She was murdered. And after that happened, nobody seemed to care. And it was just like, I knew a lot of things were happening and I could feel other things happening. But this was like a ton of bricks hit me. I didn't cry. I couldn't cry because she left 3 beautiful boys that I had to be their strength. I didn't give up what I have accomplished. I felt it was time to walk away from what I accomplished. And I sold my businesses for $1 and walked away and came home. And people couldn't believe that, but I was at a crossroads of this is what you do. And they thought I was insane. But you can't put a price on 3 beautiful little boys. So I started, there was more of the legal system that was going on, the welfare systems that were going on, and it was everything that played against us. And that became a journey for me to really try to push and try to understand, why doesn't the legal system work for Indigenous peoples? And it was a drive that drove us all the way up until we passed the bill here. It was the first bill in the United States of the Missing and Murdered Task Force bill. There was so many wonderful people here that work in the women's movement and that had played all the parts into it and that there, but was to bring in the witnesses and after all those years was the first time I talked about her. Really talked about it. It was the first time I ever cried about her. I never mourned her. And I knew that was something, because I think the missing component why we couldn't push those bills is because we were looking at a lot of the repressors that were of European descent. They were all white people, and they couldn't understand what we were going through. And the only thing they could understand was finance and money. So I had to remind them of how much it would cost for the welfare system, for the adoption system, you know, for the medical system, for the prison system, you know, on and on and on what happens to Indigenous people, for them to understand why you can't throw us a few crumbs for the missing and murdered Indigenous bill. It was one of the, probably one of the most proudest accomplishments. And when they invited me, when they did the signing on September 9th, 2019 at 9 a.m. in the morning, he handed me the first one he signed on ink and the pen. He handed it. They gave it to me, and then they gave it to the other, you know, beautiful people that's there. But I have the bill and the pen and that, you know, I made promise. It was to all the women of the world that we matter, not in a man's eyes, not in government's eyes, not in a culture, not in a religion, but we matter. We shouldn't be scarred. We shouldn't be maimed. We're people and we matter. And I thanked my sister that day for giving me a key to say that my voice, I surrendered my journey, my voice for the women of the world. I see and feel their pain, but I also know there's a beautiful smile in there. And we can push that empowerment button on no matter what color they are, that they're worth it. And that was something that I seen. Wasn't an accomplishment for myself, but it gave me the visual that I was praying for, that humanity is starting to grow again.
I am completely wedded to mystery. I love mystery. I love mystery more than I love answers. I love that we don't know. I think that the thing that unites us so wonderfully as human beings is that we all are in unknowing together. And when we can recognize that, life gets so much easier. Life is a steep climb. I mean, I feel like it's not, I'm with the Buddhists in terms of this is not easy. And the whole happiness thing and the, you know, thing that we do in this culture is just not helpful in so many ways. One of the great blessings and honors of being in pastoral ministry was having the privilege of saying something about people who had died. And that meant listening to people's stories and that kind of thing, and finding some metaphors and giving back to the community. It was so much more, for me, way more fun than writing a sermon, because you didn't have to wonder about what to write. It was there. The life was there, and it was like the topic was just standing right in front of you. It was still a huge challenge, but you didn't have to go look for something like, well, I wonder if people will find this interesting here. No, this is an interesting person. And right. And that's that. And if, you know, in another life, I want to be Terry Gross.